Yes, hi, glad you're here. Today's peer-to-peer learning circle with OFMA is on insurance and the Farmers Market Toolkit. Let me go through just a few things as we get started and how this meeting will go. This is a pretty short circle time, so we won't be taking any scheduled breaks, but please be comfortable, eat, stretch, move, do what you need. Your kids, your pets, your background, whatever's going on, it's all welcome. Please go ahead and participate out loud. There'll be time for Q&A, and we're counting on hearing your questions. And we'd also really like to hear answers that you have and resources that you want to share with your fellow farmers market peers. And then in the chat, you can always type in your questions. You can respond to prompts, share resources and links, and give each other affirmations. It's great to see everyone. We'd love to have your cameras on, but being off camera is totally fine too. We know that that can get tiring if you're doing a lot of these. Just make sure to check if you've got your mute on and off when you want it on or off. And then just also to mention that this hour is being recorded and will be posted to OFMA's website. I also want to introduce you to Quinn Richards. Quinn is serving as OFMA's interim communications coordinator for the next couple of months. She's a farmers market vendor with Farm Punk Salads, and today's pretty much her first day at OFMA. She'll be monitoring the chat and making sure Dar and I see any questions that you have. Quinn, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's great to see where everyone's from here. I was just noticing Coos Bay. One of my best friends is from Coos Bay. And yeah, I'm excited to be involved with OFMA because, yeah, I've been a farmer for the past 6 or so years and been involved in food systems and worked for other farmers markets. So it's fun to kind of continue to revolve around the same community, but kind of change the different orientations that I'm in and perspectives. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all more regularly.
Thanks, Quinn. Just want to let you know a little bit more about what we're doing here. So OFMA holds these peer learning circles every month. Usually they're on the first Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. We put on these sessions so you can connect with others who run farmers markets and benefit from the wealth of experience and know-how that's in this state amongst you all. Sometimes we choose a seasonal or emergent topic to focus on. You don't have to sign up for these sessions. You can use the same link you used today, but if you'd like to get a reminder for your calendar, just put your email in the chat and we'll add you to the calendar event. Also, check out recordings of past workshops and learning circles at OFMA's website. They're under the resources tab and are incorporated into each topic listed there. We also list the most recent recordings under the past proceedings page. And also we ask you, share this knowledge out. Help your board members and vendors find the info they're asking you for by linking them to OFMA's tools and videos too. So I quickly want to go into a couple, we're almost there, but I want to go into a couple goals for today. So I'm going to start with what we won't do. We're not going to dig into any one market's insurance's challenges, and we're not going to get specific advice from our presenter on what markets should do or should buy. We will, though, be providing basic understanding of types of insurance used by markets and vendors, and we're going to point to resources, checklists, and other markets experiences that then you can use to troubleshoot your own insurance dilemmas. So now I want to introduce Darlene Wolnik. She's worked in farmers markets for more than 20 years, and in that time, she's been a leader in creating resources to help market operators run their markets better. When she was deputy director for Market Umbrella, she designed and ran one of the first free farmers market resource sites in the US. Currently, she's with the Farmers Market Coalition, which is a nonprofit serving farmers markets across the United States with support and advocacy. And she oversees all farmers market support staff projects and leads the networking for market leaders, provides analysis of farmers market sector, and develops technology and tools appropriate for markets, including the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Dar take over.
Great.
Thank you.
That sounded like a lot of work that I've done, but doesn't feel like it. As Amanda said, I started off as a market manager as well. I was the market manager in the New Orleans markets, starting in 2000, and lasted about a decade, running the many daily, weekly markets that organization runs to this day, year-round markets. And in that time, I was thinking about resources and how what the issues were as a market manager and as a TA provider. And that's what FMC developed into. Hopefully all of you know that, Oregon farmers markets are able to be members of FMC because we share a partnership with Oregon Farmers Market Association. So when you become a member of Oregon Farmers Market Association, you also become a member of FMC, and your access to resources that are for members only is included in that. So we renew that every year with each state. So check in on that, but it's really a cool way to do it. And we really just want to make sure everybody has access to resources. So, Amanda wanted to talk about, this idea about insurance. It's cool to see that everybody who answered said they have insurance, which is great for their markets. But I know that's only the tip of the iceberg. And so we really want to focus on whatever questions you have. And the way we want to just start this, as Amanda said, is to really talk about the resource. Hopefully all of you have really looked at is, of course, the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit resource. It's found at farmersmarketlegaltoolkit.org. And it is a resource that we have been developing over the last, I guess it's like 7 years now, in partnership with the Vermont Law School, Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, and NOVA Vermont, because it's centered in Vermont. They sort of become our test cases, which is fantastic because they're really good about that, which is nice. Very brave about, letting us poke and prod around. And so this toolkit was really designed so that markets, not only markets, but those service providers you work with, your lawyers, your insurance agents, your boards, would go through this process and look through the toolkit and understand some of the basics. And as we talk about, as Amanda pointed out, because it's designed by the Vermont Law School, it is only focused on legal issues. It is not generally about lots of different things. They leave that to us. But this conversation we have and this cohort with the law school and NOFA is about what happens is we hear from all of you about a new issue. We bring it to the law school if we think it's a legal issue. And then they say to us, okay, we'll go look at that. And they look for precedent. Is there something that's ever happened with markets they can point to in research, or something like markets in farmers or food systems or other, and they have lots of resources to do that. And then are there resources that we can add to the toolkit that will help you kind of walk yourself through that? So they will, and then we kind of go back and forth over a period of year on each of these resources. So we really feel like it results in something you can use. And so the insurance one was an early one, as you can imagine. We said, we know markets are confused about what kind of insurance to get. And so essentially the farmers market, so if you go under manage risks, you're going to see this page, Farmers Market Insurance's risk management. What I like about this page, again, is that it goes down to these accordions, the insurance basics. This is obviously information you can use for your board, your vendors, others as well, your host site, the entity that maybe owns the host site. But I like about it because it goes into, again, things like the kind of coverage, what you might want to cover. Really important. I think a lot of people, but I'm sure we'll have a couple questions about some of these, which I'm happy we'll go into. Even finding how to find an agent. I love that, we talked about admitted versus not admitted. This is about how much the state can, supports that insurer, how much they back them, ratings, things like that. And then there's this really cool thing of how the questions that you can ask when you're looking for an insurer. These are really good. Really, we talked to a couple insurance agents as well and really gave some through that. And so that's really the basics of that piece of it. But of course, what most, and then there's also a really interesting case study of a slip and fall. So this is one of those things that I think a lot of markets have, even examples of, we will find that markets have boards or advisors who aren't so sure that they need to cover things like this. Well, doesn't that cover the host? Doesn't the host site cover that? Doesn't the owner cover that? This is a fantastic case study of the market in Montpelier, Vermont, that had a slip and fall. It's public property, but had the right coverage to cover the market, and the details about that are really helpful. So this is something you might want to take out and print out or show to, again, the host site, even if it's the city or whoever, and say, look, we've got to think about some of this. So that's what we try to do with this site, is to really give you a sense of what is sort of the law, how our field works, what do people do, as Amanda mentioned, of course. And then, of course, under Explore Resources, you're going to see a bunch of, this is where every resource we talk about it throughout the whole toolkit can be found directly here. This one, called Insurance and Liability FAQs, which I'm hoping, I don't know if you can see it yet. Can y'all see that? Insurance and Liability FAQ. Okay, great. It's always weird sometimes on Zoom, like it won't go. This is one we did because we heard in a couple states, actually really just mainly one, which was Virginia, that there were insurers who were not honoring their insurance policies during COVID because the markets had not been deemed as essential. And we took that to the law school and said, is there a legal precedent? And they said, yeah, there absolutely is a legal precedent on that. And things like aggregation. So that's really where, transmission of COVID, things like that. So this is that's where this spring came out, this idea of, are you required? It's called a duty to defend. And the law school really describes it in here and shows you that, yes, essentially, there is a duty to defend a policy from your insurer. And you can take something like this information and take it to your insurer, or, and say, look, this is what we understand. And it's interesting because this came up in my state, Louisiana, recently, because that had happened I think at some level, it happens where insurers were not going to cover for the last hurricane, and the commissioner in Louisiana wrote a letter, literally saying, you have the duty to defend that insurance policy. In this case, this did not require, a declaration for you to defend that policy. So that's what you want to look for, things like this. So this will give you a good example of that. So this is good. This document, this FAQ, was just done this last year. It was the most recent one that we did. And the last thing that really goes into this piece of this is this idea of managing risks and checklists. So actually, I'll go back to the resources because it's already open. So there's all these wonderful checklists in here. So there's things like ADA compliance checklists. There are things like how to make sure that you have a safety checklist. And there's also things like an incident report. We really recommend that you just think about the paper trail, all of this. So this incident report is just that, no matter what happens on your site. I mean, I'll give you an example of my own. As a shopper, at those same markets in New Orleans, I saw somebody, sort of had grazed into a very small auto accident. Somebody leaving the market, ran into somebody else. And I, went back to the market manager and filled this out as a bystander, which helped because there were all kinds of issues later on. And so by just having that available, and I said, can I have that incident report? And they're like, oh yeah, that's so great. You know about that. But anytime this happens, it's good to have that paper trail. And so we have these examples of templates in the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit for you to use. It's a good thing to keep in, the actual market folder, so that when anything happens, you have that ability to keep track of it. And then this one, for insurance purposes, I think is really good. This is a market day safety checklist. This is actually based on something that we had at our markets in New Orleans, because we were on a university campus, and that university covered our insurance, but the risk management manager did this walkthrough with us every year. and he would walk through with us and point out what he was looking for. And so you need to take that, see that little bump you got there, you need to spray paint around that and put a little warning around that. So if anybody trips, at least we know that you've given some, because basically what you're trying to do is mitigate it. So those are basically the resources that are on there. But I think one of the things that usually comes up with markets is this question about vendors versus market liability, right? This is one of the big questions. Besides your own slip and fall and your own general liability, how do you handle vendor versus your liability? That toolkit goes into that as well. Talks a little bit about that, talks about that. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could maybe like make sure we're starting like way at the basics of what is the couple types of insurance that farmers markets themselves start to usually have, which is what is the liability insurance. And I think there's product insurance and D&O insurance, and just say what those are first. And
yeah,
then
they're in there.
like what a vendor might have and how that coordinates.
Yeah, I'll take you back in there. Again, those are in there as well. I mean, again, I'm not an insurance agent. So, but yeah, if you go into here, you'll see this, it goes like, I think we went through that, I thought I hit that, sorry. Here it goes into the type of insurance right there. So into your, again, back to the toolkit, here's the types of insurance that you have basically, most markets are dealing with commercial just general liability or CGL insurance. That's your, for your making sure that you have insurance for, again, slip and fall and any other activities at the market. D&O, of course, is when you are talking about the entity that governs the market having coverage. It's really important to think about director. It stands for director and operator insurance. And if you have an elected board who are fiscally actually held responsible, it's really important to put director and operator insurance in there. And it's called D&O. And but it doesn't, in all cases, by the way, insurance is a mitigative factor. It's going to help you. It's not going to protect you from being sued. It's not going to protect you from having something hurt, if you don't have the right coverage, if you don't have the right risks. Workers' compensation, of course, is if you have actual staff, and even if you have volunteers in some states who want to carry workers' compensation, you'll look and see in your state. And this is what we mean by this toolkit, taking this toolkit to an insurer and saying, here's what we understand is the rule in our field. What is it that you want to do? Auto insurance, of course, if the market is using property insurance, and then of course, if there are staff, you want to have that in there. When you talk about vendor level, and then of course, one of the things with vendors is the same, commercial liability, but also product liability. A lot of states have started to build in a requirement about the minimum or minimum of how much product liability market vendors should have. In some cases, that is a minimum, for the entire, business, not per market site, it's for the entire business. And that, of course, means if somebody gets sick, they have insurance that covers it. And what a lot of markets used to do back in the first days of this was markets would create a hold harmless clause. And a hold harmless clause essentially was something that markets thought actually got them out of the weeds of being sued if something happened. In this toolkit goes through that. So it's really important to read through that part of it. It's not necessarily the case. There's a little more specifics to do a hold harmless, and that just is a way that you make sure that the product liability that the vendor has, it probably will not cover that market. It probably doesn't. The only way it's going to cover that market is if the market is also an additional insured for that product liability, which is very unusual. But so that's not normal. We don't see that. So basically what happens, what we're talking about is, let's say someone gets sick in a market and a vendor is sued by the market. Someone gets sick and they say, I'm going to sue that vendor. Most of the time what happens is a lawyer is going to say, well, let's sue the vendor, the market, the host site, the city, as many people as we can get into this lawsuit. And one by one, those are dropped off because that entity proves they have no liability or has their ducks in a row, or it's just clear that they're not really liable for whatever reason. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the opportunity that when something happens in a lawsuit, even if you're not held liable, you're going to probably have to call in a lawyer or somebody to help you deal with even the early days of this. That's why you want to have insurance. So a lot of markets would love it if they could become an additional insured on each of their vendors' product policies. That's a tall case. If any of you are doing that, good for you. And this tells you a little bit how you could do that. And as you can see, one of the things that the toolkit talks about is if there's a sort of basically an endorsement by that vendor and that policy for each of the markets. So there requires a little bit of information. You can look through these to get a better sense of that. And then a certificate holder, which a lot of people have started to do, which is great, but it doesn't mean you're insured at all. What it essentially is doing is making sure that when a vendor cancels a policy, you know about it. So that tells you, hey, guess what? Because that used to be a big problem. Those of you that have been around a while, vendors would come into a market. They would, they would show their product liability insurance or their CGL, and then they would drop it sometime in that year and not tell the market. And now this, if you become a certificate holder on record, you're going to be told when the insurance has lapsed, and that may help you, obviously help you. And of course, a lot of markets worry about vendor insurance, the cost of vendors. There's no question if there's a cost, but I think one of the arguments market leaders should be making to their vendors is if you don't have the insurance, if you're not incorporated, you're going to lose your house. You're going to lose your business. You're going to be being held liable is going to happen if you're sued. And if you don't have insurance, if you're not covered, this money's coming out of somewhere. So and this is also true. We see markets who are run by vendors and are not incorporated. That's why incorporations are the big piece of this, right? To incorporate the market, to incorporate the business so that it's held separately from personal assets. That's something else that this site goes into under pick a business structure, that's why it's first. They really want people to do that. So essentially CGL, product liability, director and operators insurance, a couple others are definitely out there, but those are what you're going to be dealing with most of the time. Questions, comments? Yes, I see Rebecca saying that. That's very cool. Rebecca, you said everybody's is additional insured. Are you finding out that any of those vendors have paying an extra cost for that?
Generally, no. In fact, I tell vendors that if they are being charged additional for making us an additional, that might be a warning sign about the insurer. I have been more aggressive in very recent times because the policies available to us here in Oregon are more and more closing in on the markets and requiring insurance of everyone. I have kind of like a handshake deal on the side that says if I make this really good full court press, if I have most of them, that will be counted as good enough. Mm-hmm. What I'm finding is that the agents are playing dumb with me. Like, they'll try to send me a cert without the check mark in the cert place that shows that I'm an additional insured or no other words. And so I just keep coming back at them and saying, this is what we need for, and if you read our rules, it's not required for participation in our markets to be insured, but we strongly encourage it. And if you are insured, we say, please, 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 let's do this. And so I even will get in between the vendor and the agent and chew on them directly. And it seems to be necessary because they're not telling the vendor that they don't want to do this, but they're not wanting to take the liability on. Yes. The agent is trying to avoid, and the same damn agent may be telling me to get that to happen. Like the agency representing my market is simultaneously telling me to do this and simultaneously playing defense for the other side.
Yeah, I think
it's very frustrating to see, and it's not overt, but I feel it. I feel that they're trying to be the preventer of additional insured.
Yeah, I think it's true that, well, of course, right? I mean, that makes sense. Especially when they're not charging, they want to see. That's a great point to double check those policies. I think you're absolutely right. that a lot of it, some of it's ignorance. They just really do not understand what they're talking about, what they're asking to be insured. And I think other situations, why would they want to add additionally insured? They want you to protect it. So I think that's really, yeah, required by markets, our market to have all vendors have insurance again, but how do you make sure that's there? How do you make sure they keep that insurance? Are you an additional insured? Are you at least a certificate holder? So you know if they cancel their insurance, if something happens, you know. I mean, that happens. We all know it's happened to everybody. A lot of, in almost every state, we've heard this situation happening. And of course we want, yes. And then to be the insurance. It's really interesting. It's good to see. And it's good to hear that people are doing the additional insured and it sounds like not having, again, just crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I think that's really, really important. I think it's shocking when I hear markets say to me they don't require vendor insurance. I think it's a good practice in a market. I think a market has some baseline stuff, and to me that we have heard enough stories to hear markets and vendors protect themselves by paying that $100 or $150 a year for what they're doing. And of course, if they're going to sell to anybody else, if they're going to sell outside the market to any retailer, they are going to be required to have insurance.
It's not
you guys, how about people that are attached to your market that aren't vendors? It looks like Lisa has a question about
I was about to get to
what
that.
you need to do with regards to volunteers, kids programs. Lisa, do you want to add more to your question, or just you want to come off mic and say anything?
For instance, we just did a pumpkin carving event for Halloween, and we had folks sign a waiver of liability, but I was just kind of curious, was that necessary? Is that something we should be doing more often, et cetera?
What do people do? Do you guys have liability? You guys do waivers? How many markets do waivers? Not too many.
I used to work for Portland Farmers Markets, and we did waivers for pumpkin carving and for, like, we did a disco pickle event, and we did lots of waivers. And so that's why I'm just kind of curious, were they just going over
waivers? Yeah, waivers of volunteers are good. They're not, again, they're worth whatever level that that volunteer wants to honor that, and you are able to actually mitigating. Again, it's about mitigation of risk, right? So exactly right. Are the tools they're going to use safe? Are they kept sharp? Are they just left around? Like all the stuff, even if you have a waiver and if you didn't mitigate the issues, you could very well be held liable. But certainly your CGL, your commercial general liability, will cover a lot of that. You want to check with your insurer. What if we have an event? That's a great question to ask. That's exactly the kind of question to ask, because and I think a lot of times what we've learned over the years is just to describe it. That's why we did this toolkit partly, was that you could take it to an insurer, you could take it to a lawyer, and they could understand the scenarios that happen at market. So I think the more you're able to tell an insurer a scenario of how this happens and what we do, they can say, well, a little more would be better. It's a little bit, do a little bit more there. Because the waiver is good, but it's in every situation. What we see in these situations is you still have to mitigate the responsibility. You still have to make sure it was a safe situation, a safe environment. Yeah, no chainsaw carving, no dull, rusting, serrated knives. But I mean, it's a great idea to do it, of course.
What was that last crazy idea?
No rusty, dull, serrated knives.
Oh, dull. Okay. Sorry. I just came from the pool. My ears are.
But I think, any other question? I mean, I think the main thing with, like you're hearing in your, in your own state is you've got to think about what the general practice is for mitigating, because that's essentially what a lawyer or insurance is going to do. They're going to look for precedent, and they're going to look around your area to see if someone has done something else, and they're going to say, well, you knew to do that. Your other markets do that. That's what happens, in these situations. A lot of times they're going to look for precedent. So definitely check in with each other, definitely up the game. And, you all know this well. If you all up the game, it becomes the culture. You say, look, this is the way it's going to be, then that's the way it becomes. You're going to fight. We all know it, but, it definitely is. Oh, yeah, Campbell Risk Management. Rebecca's asked about Campbell Risk Management. We have a long relationship with Campbell Risk Management, which we haven't really upgraded. We haven't done much with them the last couple of years. We used to have a whole deal with them, and they were the first ones. Like, we went to find an insurer who would work with markets, because back in the day there wasn't anybody who would even offer farmers markets insurance, and they didn't understand. Campbell Risk Management were willing to do that, take it on, give a certain deal for farmers market members. We don't really do much with them anymore, but we do check in with them. We do check. As far as we know, we asked them about that question about the insurance liability in terms of pandemic, and they were like, why would we not honor those policies? I can't believe that people are doing that. We're like, yeah, well, that's what we're hearing. So we do check in with them, and they're really still very agreeable, but we don't have the close relationship we once did. We talk to any insurer that wants to ask us a question, or we can send them somewhere. We're happy to do.
I have a vendor that I think was just confused and about her. She told me that Campbell had said that they didn't want to cover her because she wasn't a hobby farm, and I said that doesn't sound right. And then when I talked to her again, it sounded like she was very confused among all of her different policies and what they did. So that's a reminder that we can't just assume that our vendors have the basic knowledge of business insurance stuff. We need to be there to educate them. This is a vendor I've had for a really long time, and I was surprised that she was that confused.
Yeah, I mean, sure, like you said, insurers sometimes do stuff that is hard for anyone else to understand. And I definitely recommend that you think about whoever your farmer sustainability partners are, who work with their new farmers, emerging farmers, to make sure that they understand the process you go through to really bring in vendors and, think about these resources. Because we, of course, as you all know, we will hear from some of those farmer support people that they don't understand what markets require and why markets require certain things. So it's really, again, send them to the toolkit. That's why it's there, so somebody can really understand what the details that have gone. And of course, hopefully you all know Farm Commons. Is that right? Is that the right name? Gosh, is it S or is it? Yeah, it's Farm Commons. Rachel Armstrong, brilliant work. Farmer liability, farmer legal issues, really, really, really good work on that site too for farmers. So definitely send them to Farm Commons. There's so many resources for farmers.
Dar, I was wondering if farmers markets very often have property insurance. I'm thinking of some of the things that happened at my market, which was attempted break-ins to our storage unit. If they had gotten in there and stolen a bunch of our stuff, like that would have been a major deal for us to replace all of that. But I don't often see markets having that, that kind of insurance. Is that true?
Well, we certainly do see it in some parts, but I think you're right. I think it's a slow creep, right? You have a little, you have some stuff in the back of your car, then you buy a trailer, then you get a storage space, and moving into bigger and bigger. And you may not be thinking too closely about that, but of course it's important, and including, just the cost of things like your machines, your credit card processing, all the things you're going to have to replace. So absolutely, we're seeing more. Yes, we are seeing more property insurance at markets for sure, and especially obviously those who. It's tricky because a lot of times those stuff, and I know this is true of many of you, that stuff goes home with you. And whether, you have to buy it separately, and you have to think about how that fits into, do you have a home office? What's your insurance at home? There's a lot of different, differences here. So it's a little sensitive. Usually we'll cross over a little bit with your own private home, your home office issues. So if you have a property insurance, if you have insurance over that. So definitely talk to your insurance agent about that. It may be that the farmers market stuff, tries to be stay in one room. And we've seen things like, farmers market managers. I mean, we've seen ATMs being dragged off site and stolen, and crazy stuff like that. So yes, absolutely, property insurance, especially around some of those materials and the expensive materials, for sure. Yes, we do see that. What else are people worried about or thinking about insurance wise or liability wise? I mean, I don't know if the pandemic brought up more than the usual ones we talked a little bit about. We talked a little bit, again, in that one resource, it talks a little bit about the cost of like the liability around aggregation. Rachel Armstrong at Farm Commons brought that up. Markets shifted to an aggregation site. And then often what they did by doing that, if they weren't careful, they became the owners of the product. And sometimes it's a matter of how much time you do it, or if you change it in any way. And if you take control of product and you are liable, where's your liability? Where's your product liability for that item? So that's covered in that. And Rachel Armstrong and Farmers Market, the Farmers Market Legal Toolkit team did a webinar last year on that. And said, essentially think about that when you start to aggregate product and take it from vendors and, and repackage it or hold it for a period of time or have to keep it under temperature, you should be careful because you may be switching product liability to the market itself.
Karen and Amanda, Melissa, Lisa, what brought you to wanting to be here today? What questions did you have or were hoping that you would hear answers to?
I honestly, if we have time, I'd love, and if Quinn's willing to, I'd love to hear like your process as a vendor getting insurance, and like having like because that's my most thing is trying to explain this to vendors who have never gotten insurance before. It's really complicated, and
Right.
I try to make it as simple as possible, but it can really deter people. And so I'd love to like hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, happy to share. We used Country Financial, and I had a great experience with them. I think that unfortunately, one thing that happens with insurance and vendors is that people look for the cheapest price. And in that, they're going to potentially get some insurance that's like not even relevant to what they need. They're going to get, it's just not, it's not full coverage, and or they don't know how to use their coverage, or their agent is kind of just like not hard to get a hold of. So we used Country Financial. They weren't the cheapest, but I think our agent was Cole Pritchard, and he was always great. He had a really in-depth relationship with farming, and so he knew how to give us coverage when we wanted additional insurance. For this year, for example, we did Hollywood Farmers Market, we did Lake Oswego, and it was really straightforward to communicate with him to get the additional insured, send that to the markets. And so I think that just making sure that people have insurance where the agents are understand farmers markets and understand farming is helpful. That was kind of my personal experience with it. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's great, well put. And I think the other question is, can markets' own insurers also be encouraged to, cover vendors? It helps a lot. I mean, it's obviously a great bundling for that insurer, that agent to be able to get, 20 policies. And if it's, again, that's what we did with Campbell's. We went to Campbell's and said, look, we can give you better, support if you work with us a little bit, if you understand what we're asking for you to cover in markets and not, penalize them. And very, very important,
Yeah, I don't even know if we actually ended up paying extra for the additional insured. I know the one thing that was a somewhat frustrating thing was you had to buy a membership to the Oregon Farm Bureau every year, but then you also got their like political recommendations in the mail, which felt like I didn't really understand why. But is it within the boundary of farmers market managers to give resources to vendors who are looking for insurance, or does that kind of cross a certain line?
I will say that on a national level, we are seeing this example as a choice for removing barriers for, marginally oppressed communities as farmers. Like some people are actually talking about utilizing market resources to mitigate some of the costs of year one, especially just year one. Of course, a lot of new farming, new farmer, entities that they do cover some of those as well. So I think certainly that's I think you have to be sensitive. I think you're right, right? When you have to be sensitive, but you have to be firm. And I think you're right. Recommendations really do help, but I think it has to be, again, if it doesn't happen, I think the point is vendors don't always understand that, if it happens, their assets will be gone. Their assets will be taken from them. If you're saving up for your kid's college, it's going to be gone. You got a new truck, it's going to be taken. If you lose that and you don't have insurance and you're found liable. And product liability is a tricky one. And that's when we really say, look, it's so tricky. It's just best to really be covered on this, right? Because it's such a tricky, it's a hard path to follow back to product liability, but especially, and I think that goes along hand in hand with the other piece of that, which is to really enforce those rules, whatever rules you have in your market, to make sure vendors are following the rules for, the name and phone numbers or the weight or whatever the ingredients that they have to have on there, on whatever your rules are. Those were our rules. And our argument always said to vendors, like, look, if someone turns out to be allergic to an item in your product, just because they're allergic to it, they need a phone number to call. It's not going to help them to call me on Saturday night. I'm not the person who knows. You need to have that phone number or action on there, especially if you're going to sell from home. But that's levels, depends on the level, right? But I think you're right. It's hard to tell that story to vendors. It's definitely hard. It's a tough business to ask them to pony up a couple $100 for sure.
Like, especially too, I feel like if you have different types of products, so like for us, for example, we were a farm, but we also had a value added product. That's two different insurance policies, or like we were able to get it written under one, but it had like two subcategories. And so I think that it could be helpful communicating to vendors, asking them, well, is this all the same type of product, a ready to go?
That's right.
Each thing is different than a can of pickles. It's different than a tomato. And just making sure, or like, just kind of, I could see like having, you could create like a document for onboarding new vendors who are unsure about insurance, and just kind of walking them through like a little checklist of being like, do you have different types of insurance? I could see that being helpful for somebody.
I think the idea of, again, we go back to that idea of categories is such a great one. And it goes back to the work in New Orleans that we did. We actually, our risk guidelines at the market umbrella are written by type of category, the category of food, category 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're managed by risk. So category 1 is raw fruits and veg. Category 2 is prepared vegetarian. Category 3 is meat and seafood. Category 4 is cooked meat or seafood. Category 4 is actually not allowed in the market. As of this point, the state has not allowed it. But each of those categories, and the way that they designed the field to table was that it made it very simple to say, look, here's how we're going to manage you in this situation. So, we're going to ask for temperatures. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then that can be brought back. The vendor can be taking that to their insurer and say, look, we do these checks and they do those checks. And here's the control over that. Yeah, I think all of this is good. They're definitely working on that, but working on categories of risk, really big, right? Sweet versus acidic, or, there's a lot of changes in that, whatever. If I don't know if you all have a cottage food law in Oregon and how expansive it is. How expansive is your cottage food law if you do have one? Let me know.
Okay, it does cover stuff in jars. And we have, I think that our small farms program at OSU did some checking around to see if people were having a lot of trouble with insurance. I think there were isolated incidents where an insurer freaked out about it, but I think everything's fairly smooth now. I don't think that Campbell Risk Management asks you about that sort of level of detail. They have a list of excluded products. I think FLIP has maybe a list of excluded products, but since they cover food trucks, FLIP is not likely to go crazy over a jar of pickles if they're allowing people to do sushi on a food truck.
Well, but that's very, you're right. But I mean, as you know, restaurants and preparing food has a very different set of rules than,
there's more on the mitigation front there. Yes. But at any rate, I got FLIP for our farm this a couple of years ago. We finally decided we needed to do that. The only value-added product that we're doing at this time is dried apples and pears, and that didn't trigger anything.
Yeah, low risk and high risk of the jar.
Um,
But I mean, also be looking as market managers, mitigating their risk, walking around and seeing things that looking at people reusing lids and rusted lids and dented, and you've got to pull that. I've been a couple markets last couple of years, and I'm like, I said, walked over to the market manager, said, I love that guy, but you better go, there's some stuff they're bringing. It looks a little old, it looks a little beat up, and it's starting to look like it needs to come off the table. Not a good idea.
There's also just the labeling. You teach them how to do the labeling. They get in, everything's fine. And then on a week-in basis, you go to the table and, there's always 3 things that are not labeled on the table. And you pull them down and rinse and repeat. It seems to, I don't know how I'm going to get through to this booth that I'm really tired of this, and they should just label them at home.
Well, one of the things we've done and seen some places is this idea of using what we called, God, what did we call it? Maybe a mystery chef. I don't remember if that's what we called it. But we essentially would have our volunteers and shoppers who were trusted, and we would give them, a bit of token money to go buy something and then go rate it. Like it's something that's been on the table for a long time. Rate it for its design, rate it for its quality, and they would literally we'd say, go buy something for $5 and take it home and test it and fill out this postcard and bring it back to me. And then I would just mail it out to that vendor, and it would say, the label was very clear, the taste was good, and it was not us. It was people who were volunteers or shoppers who were willing to help, or chefs or whoever. And it was a great program because most of the time, of course, they were giving great kudos to those vendors. Wonderful presentation.
But still, they may say, well, I picked this up because I wasn't sure what it was. And that's good feedback. That means the label is not communicating.
Exactly. So use something like that, utilize that community around you as well. Don't feel like you have to be the only person doing everything. There are a lot of people, as you have a lot of people who are invested in the success and the sustainability of your market, including those longtime advisors and shoppers and other people who would probably be very happy to help with some of that. And I found it to be a wonderful program.
Yeah, I like that idea for it's so good. Sometimes there's finding ways to have volunteers be effectively find a place to do something at the organization. And that sounds like a really fun task for them to do, and an easy way for vendors to get, especially longtime vendors who are very sure and feel like they're very sure in what they're doing and are not asking for feedback as much anymore. That's a really great way to get them to that. I don't want to lose it in the comments, and this is going a little bit back to that property insurance thing, but Amanda Pastoria was talking about protecting things that she takes home, tokens and cash and equipment. And I was just wanting to make sure that Amanda got the information that she needed, got her question answered around that, or if there was more that she wanted to know. Because it sounds like the solution to that, Amanda, is that property insurance is something that your market would need to consider.
And whether or not it will cover your home.
That will cover us. I mean, we have 2 sheds at the farmers market too. And then I manage 2 markets, and one of them I bring home all of the equipment and whatnot. And then the other one is just put into the shed. But what if somebody breaks into my home? And I mean, is that covered just under the market's property insurance as well? Or do I need to cover that?
I mean, you need to talk to your insurer. It may or may not be. Again, it's really up to each insurer, and it's a scenario you've got to cover. All they're going to cover is the scenarios they know about.
I
The
think
surprise scenario is usually not a good thing with that, but saying, look, here's the deal. I have a home office. It goes to my home office. That door locks during the day. You've got to mitigate. You've got to explain to them you're mitigating their problem as much as you can. It's not where anybody can walk in and find it, whatever that is, and whatever you're worried about. And then, you're likely to be able to get, obviously it's not a huge theft issue. Again, the numbers of people getting, stuff stolen from their house and from markets is not high. So we don't have a lot of numbers, stats that are against us on that. So I think insurance, but again, I talked to your home insurer and your market insurer for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I got a note when I And it may have been when I was still in town and had State Farm, but I think they told me no dice. If it looks like it's market equipment, we're not going to cover it under your homeowner policy. And now I have such a terrible policy for our farmhouse that I'm pretty sure I would get a coupon to Burger King if it burned down.
Well, there's that.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that's why, you know, dedicating a home office, locking it, trying to figure out, and again, you're right, none of this is great. And this is also employee versus independent contractor. There's other stuff going on here too. What are you carrying? There's a lot of details here. And this is another one we talk a lot about, of course, is that idea of what, you know, how an independent contractor is carrying market materials around. That's actually something that, you know, not always, it depends. It's a really tricky IRS definition of independent contractor. And one of the things they use is just some version for their own sample. One of them is are you using your own equipment or the company's equipment? Because the company's equipment is usually given to employees and not to independent contractors. It can be very tricky. So I definitely look at that part of the toolkit as well and really talk about that, because it's really a tricky issue. We definitely haven't, I think I found that in most cases where there's been a property theft of market materials, markets have been able to get that money back if they had insurance, but I don't know that they were necessarily, you know, the insured necessarily had walked through the space and seen what it looked like. You know, try to just do your best to mitigate it, keep separate spaces, that kind of stuff, I think. Lock boxes, things like that. Yeah. I think
You can certainly-
tokens are an issue we're very worried about in this field. There's a lot of liability around the tokens you have out there. Are you making sure that they're safe at market? Are they locked? Are they counted? Or do you know how many you have? Do you know where they are? You know, are they put somewhere safe when you get out of the market? Are they left in your car, unlocked car? Anybody could grab them. Not a big problem, but it could be if $10,000 of tokens just disappeared from your, you know, from your house. What are you going to do? Right? Something to think about.
Buffalo also has a little insurance handout. It's much brief. I think you should all be going to the toolkit to get things in depth. But if you just want a quick, like, where do I start from? Our little insurance handout from about a year ago can also just get you started in understanding the terms.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you come up with legal issues that you think we could cover in the toolkit, do send them to me. It definitely is a very slow and painful process for the right reasons, right? You want to make sure it's really done right. But we, you know, they've been great about coming back, the law school, to do it again, to come back for more funding, to go find more funding and keep on this process. So there's a lot of stuff on there, really a lot of stuff. And again, I would really say send your insurance companies to that site too. Send your agents to that, so you're not just telling them. Let them.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had done that a few years ago when I was trying to educate an agent. I want to bring up something about, it's a little in the weeds, country companies that Quinn used. They for longtime vendors, I just get this thing called a notice of continuous insurance, which is really annoying because I don't have any reference point on what it was to begin with. They're just saying it's still going. And I guess if I need to know, I just have to go back to the agent. Also, they send me in most cases, they send me 2 copies of every document, and I've found that they apparently like to waste your money, Quinn.
I don't think you can stop them from doing that. Yeah.
No, they want to do that. Yeah, they want to kill those trees. So
yeah, I can't say I know why they're sending that or what that's about.
Yeah, it's not.
I mean, I guess
it's nothing the vendor can control. It's just
right.
Yeah.
Right.
But the truth is, they write the majority of farm policies in Oregon. They, you know, and it enables our Farm Bureau to claim that they have a lot of small farmers as members who are not actually politically aligned with them, but just have to be members in order to get this insurance. So that's just for you. That's what the game is about.
Yeah, no, I would say the last
Oh,
thing
totally.
about this is for, in terms of these insurers, like I was in Maine at the last conference and I was doing a Farmers Market Legal Toolkit keynote actually, and it was the 2020. And the two main insurers for farmers in that state were there sponsoring in the room and behind their table.
Yeah.
And it both got a good hear from what we talked about. They came over and they learned a little bit more by listening about the toolkit, and then, having a conversation with me and the main Federation of Farmers Market leader. And so, just getting them to the conference. Yeah, it's a really good idea. Getting them to say, look, we'd love to have you come just to talk, because maybe even for a couple hours, because just being in the room, they may learn some stuff that they, the right day. It's a good idea to bring them, some of those bigger insurers.
We're just at about noon here when we're about to end. Dar, is there anything else you want to leave us with as we head out?
I think you guys are doing some great stuff. I mean, you guys really have a lot of your, ducks in a row here. I mean, just don't be afraid to do the research, to go down and look and ask the question. Look at the resources we give you, ask the questions. It's exactly right. Think of those scenarios that the most likely, all you're going to do is try to reduce the risk. You're not going to get rid of the risk. You're just going to reduce it by having insurance, by having checklists, by having a paper trail, that kinds of stuff. So, just do the best you can with that. And it really will take you a long way. That kind of stuff really, it impresses, the insurers. It impresses those that come looking when you have that. So just keep that going.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to let people go on with their day. On your way out in the chat, it would be great if you could just put in there like where you are on a 1 to 5 scale. Do you still feel in the weeds about understanding insurance, or like, are you that would be like a 1 at a 5? It's like you could explain it to a vendor. Super easy. Thanks for all of you for coming today. We'll see you again the first Tuesday in December. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.